before I set up to speak to you, I had a pair of dark glasses on. And I put these on because I needed the energy somehow. You know what I mean? Like, doesn't color like gives you that? Okay,
Oh,
you
yeah.
put a pair of like colored pants on, or you put something bright, and it just like gives you a boost. I decided when all of this started to happen, and I had to leave my college and think about how I was going to move online to teach, and thinking about my mother who's 89, and she would be in her house kind of cooped up and vulnerable, and I decided to move in. This is where the house where I grew up, and it's only about 30 minutes from where I live in Troy, and I decided to come here to be able to kind of protect her and like make sure the food came in safely and that things were getting done. And I set up a studio in the garage, got a studio in her house too. She's a painter. So we've been sort of having video visits here and there. And so I think that's been kind of good right now. I've been feeling like that's been nurturing. And the fact that my students got through their semester and they were, it's inspiring, and it inspired me to kind of get myself going.
Yeah.
How about you? I mean, you're
Well,
all on the other end of the
yes.
country, and
Well, I found that all I want to do is make art. And I mean, this color palette in back of me is much more vibrant than I usually work in. And I've just felt like I just wanted to scoop out huge spoonfuls of color, just as vibrant as I can do. And it's just,
yeah.
it's just gives me a lot of pleasure just to lay the color on and just think about color. And because of abstraction, I'm not really, it's not topical, it's not linked to telling a story. It could be made, it could have been made a century ago by the constructivists. So I think it's kind of out of time, as well as being really, really pleasurable to work in. You
Yeah.
can be in any culture and relate to it. Also, it's also kind of like music to me. I'm sure to a lot of others too, because it's abstract, it has no lyrics, but it gives you the same kind of energy that really great music does.
I feel like that painting back there that I just kind of I'm almost done with was done here, and I feel the same way. There's something sort of liberating. There's a story you can tell in abstraction that can have different portals, different ways of people kind of entering. It's funny, when I first moved in with my mom, I actually was working representationally. So I felt compelled to draw her entire house.
Wow.
And so that was something that was like, so I did it in an accordion book, and I just kept drawing every room. I really felt the need to document it, and it's black and white, and it was very like, it was the only thing I could do. It felt it just was this kind of very specific document that I needed to capture. But now it's very different. Like, I feel like, okay, I need to distance myself intellectually, like to remove myself and like be able to kind of see it as though I'm outside of it in some way. And I think abstraction does that.
It releases you from your place and time, I think.
So I started noticing all the things that have been very influential in my work. All the crazy quilts, like all that painting's all cut and sewn. Everything I do is cut and sewn. I've done this sort of thing on and off since '92, when I was working on a lot of collage drawings, and I always felt like the paintings were so different than the collages, and so why couldn't I sort of connect the two? And so I got the sewing machine out. We had a treadle machine. We've got lots of different sewing machines, and just tried to figure out how I could make that work, and with a lot of trial and error, and then kind of incorporating painting back in, kind of taking back that the male heroic abstraction and doing something
Yes.
sort of a feeling. And it's funny because it's muslin. It's not even it's
It's like canvas or linen.
no, it's just a basic muslin fabric. So it doesn't have any imprint on it. It's very kind of bland, but it's translucent, so you can see the seams through it, which adds this kind of interesting banding. And so it has its own visual language.
Well, I have a background in quilt making too. My grandmother was constantly making, both grandmothers were constantly making quilts.
I can see that. And actually, the piece behind you has a lot of references to Amish kinds of quilts and shapes almost, so I can see that definitely.
Yeah, so that was very influential in my childhood, was making these things out of fabric. And of course, it was always things that, like, I don't think they would go out and buy quilt fabric. They always made it from something they had.
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, some dress or shirt or something that was
Yeah.
not worn anymore. And that, created a whole history in this beautiful abstract composition.
You have this enormous piece in back of you that's obviously virtual. Is that how big your paintings are?
Well, just this one. And I just decided to do this during the lockdown, or not lockdown actually, but shelter in place. So I decided I was just going to take up a whole wall. And that's what I did. And I've got a second one going now. I did a large scale installation a couple of years ago, but they were all projections, because I do animations.
Oh, sure.
And so I got to project these animations at 20 by 25 feet. And I loved them. Of course, they were all moving, but I love the sense that you're enveloped by whatever you're making. I know Laura said once to me, why men make all these big things and women make these small things, and why don't women make bigger things? And that's kind of stuck with me. She was probably joking, but it's like, yeah, why don't we? Don't know. I heard something really insulting a few years ago. A curator dismissed work as domestic. So anybody who made things that were not big was domestic. In other words, women make those things.
Right.
And it was so insulting, as if you had to make things big to be considered important.
When I was doing this cut and sewn work, I didn't want the seam to show, because I had a fear that if someone saw the seam from a distance, they would categorize it as a woman had made. It's like it was the language was too overt. I was worried. It's like I wanted it to be a secret. Like I wanted them to find it hidden in there, and for me to go, like, just see. Yeah. That's how I did it.
You read that book, Ninth Street Women?
I don't think, no.
Oh, you have to. That's a book you have to read. Ninth Street Women. It's about the women of abstract expressionism. Really very inspiring.
Oh, great.
Highly recommend it.
Do you ever work in printmaking?
Yeah, my both of my degrees are in printmaking.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's
yeah,
definitely my foundation. I would mix and match the techniques and try to expand them beyond the plate size. And
yeah, I've taken some printmaking too. I want to do it again. I would love to do screen printing, but I'm not sure how I can make that happen. It's hard, because right now there's like no residencies, there's limited that kind of resources, but yeah, printmaking definitely is sort of to get you think about process and layering and deconstructing and all of those things. I think printmaking's really a good vehicle for that.
It is. And then you have so many components in printmaking. You have various plates, and you have various papers, and multitude of techniques, and you can just kind of shift them and interchange them. But another reference in my abstraction that I haven't mentioned is architecture. And I'm really interested in architecture. And Seattle is a boom town, and there's construction going on everywhere. I mean, now it's a little bit stopped, and I wonder how many projects will continue, but it really makes me think about the urban space and how human or non-human it is. So although I really appreciate great abstraction and great contemporary buildings, most of what's being built is not. So I'm always thinking about how this building relates to that one and how it relates to people and how it creates our public space.
It's interesting. Just the way you're describing the buildings made me think. I mean, visually, I'm looking at that behind you, and I'm thinking
Uh-huh.
about that, and I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm already putting together something, in my head about what that could be. So, are you working in your studio? Do you have a studio in where you're living? You
Yeah.
do. So you have a room, a space.
I have a detached small building, and then I have 2 rooms in the house.
Your
Yeah.
sprawl, art sprawl.
Yes, that's right. How do you think things will change after we have a vaccine?
Oh, I I think people are still going to be super cautious, and they should be, because these things are going to start coming up probably. There's so many people that are home doing things. It's
Yeah.
like it's the way they're surviving, really, to get through this. If they're making things, or they're just do kind of doing projects that have a beginning and an end, because the world is in such flux. But yeah, we'll have to figure out how in the future how to all live together. I mean, there are all these situations where you have to live together, and how to be safe.
I heard someone refer to this as the in-between time. We were before the coronavirus, we're in the in-between time, and then we're going to have the after time.
Yeah.
And how are we going to, how are we going to go to concerts, or how are we going to go to openings? Are there going to be openings at art museums and art galleries? And how are we, what are the dancers going to do? And the theaters, geez, the theaters, no one can operate with, 20 people in the audience.
Right. I
So,
know. It'll be really hard with like people in the Northeast. And I know that you have a weather change as well. We have a pretty extreme shift. And folks who are in warm weather can have outdoor events and be spread
right.
out if you have space. But in the Northeast, I mean, I think that's why I'm taking advantage of being outside, because I know that, if this flips back, that we're all going to be stuck inside until the snow goes away. So it's harder when like when you don't have the capacity, and there's so many, those museums will probably have limited entry, how many people can come in.
So, of course, we're hoping that all the billionaires who live in Seattle will suddenly become very generous and support the arts. But I don't know how that's going to happen.